You're listening to Trek.fm.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
There was a little bar in Mill Valley where all the Starfleet trainees used to go.
The 602 Club.
You know it.
I was there more times than I can remember.
Stupid elf! You could have killed me!
Dobby never meant to kill. Dobby only meant to maim or seriously injure.
How dare you take a witch's wand! How dare you defy your masters!
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf, and Dobby has come to save Harry Potter and his friends.
Welcome, everybody, to the Leaky Cauldron. I'm so excited to be back here. I mean, of course, the 602 Club, but we're somewhere special tonight. Man, if only I was actually in London. Like, Drea, wouldn't that be awesome?
That would be amazing. My sister was there a couple weeks ago and said it was just incredible, and I'm super jealous.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm totally jealous of your sister.
I know.
Dang it. Well, anyway, we're not there, but we're here to talk Harry Potter. We're so excited as we're moving towards Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. We finally reached the end, even though it's not the end because there's 2 movies, but we'll talk about it. So excited to be back to talk to you guys here this week. Another episode of the 602 Club. Of course, remember, you can find us everywhere. Best place to do that is on iTunes. Go to itunes.com/TrekFM. You can find all of our shows while you're there. Find the 602 Club. Give us a star rating and review, and that'll really help us continue to grow. More people to find this show. Really appreciate everybody who's been there to do that already. Of course, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/TrekFM. We're on Twitter at TrekFM. We've got our listeners-only discussion group, which is called the Babel Conference. To get to that on Facebook, just type Babel into the search field on Facebook. Or if you're at the website, Trek.fm, you can click discussion on the menu bar, and that'll read you right to our listeners-only discussion group. And of course, you can email us, Trek.fm/contact. Choose a show, choose the 602 Club, and that'll come to me, any of the other hosts that are on with me. And then, of course, lastly, you can leave a voicemail. Go to speakpipe.com/TrekFM. We love getting voicemails. It's been a while, Alice. Just saying.
Alice, we're talking to you.
Yeah, that's right, because you're the only one. Actually, I take that back. Lee from England has also sent us a voicemail, so it's always just fun to get them. So, yeah, I'd love to have them, especially what you think about Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which we're diving in tonight. And I guess really the first question is this. They broke up the films.
Yeah.
They broke up that last book. And their reasoning was they felt like this book, they pretty much needed most of what happens in it. It's a big book. If you make that into a movie, it's maybe 5 or 6 hours. And then they felt, well, but if we do it like in a 2.5 to 3 hour movie, maybe we're just going to cut out too much. So I wanted to ask you, Drea, just when you first heard that, before you even saw the movie, how did you feel about it? And I guess now that you've lived with it for quite a few years, does it work for you, the idea of splitting them up?
I think this was one of the first book to movie transitions where they decided to split it into multiple movies. And then The Hobbit did it into 3 movies, and then The Hunger Games did it into 2 movies, and then you sort of got, I think, did Twilight do it? I don't know. I don't follow Twilight, but
yeah, Twilight did do it, actually.
There you go. Breaking Dawn or whatever that last one was. So I get why they did it, but I feel like they left out things I wanted when they did it. So I have no problem with them splitting it into 2 different movies, but the fact that I was still missing things I wanted when they made 2 movies, I guess was just disappointing for me.
No, I actually am right there with you. I think I have no problem with it being 2 films. And I think that of all of the books into movies that they've done in 2 films, I think it makes the most sense. This is a story like the rest of the movies. They began to cut out anything that wasn't directly related to Harry. Wasn't really, and so in this book, Harry is in the entire book. there isn't really a scene without Harry in it.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you really need to take all of that together and put most of that on screen. Now, even putting that all together, I think you're still going to have to cut things, because if you just do a literal adaptation, again, you're talking like 2 6-hour movies, it seems like.
They'd be long. It was a long and detailed book. I mean, she was literally wrapping up all the ties that she made through, 6 other books. So it was a very heavy book. But there was still a couple big things that they sort of left out. I mean, my favorite part in the book never happened in the movie. Actually, 2 of my favorite parts of the book never happened in the movies. So I was disappointed in those. And they rushed through some other things. So I kind of wished for just a little bit more if I was getting 2 movies. But I'm glad we got as much as we did, and that they did decide to break it into 2 movies and give me at least as much as they could.
Let's just jump right into it. What was missing that you really wish? Because this is funny, because we had this conversation back and forth throughout the different, and you're always like, nah, it's okay. But it's interesting to hear you be like, oh no, I missed stuff.
I did.
So what was it for you that was missing?
There was actually 2 big parts. One was his relationship with the Dursleys never got resolved.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of lost them at the end of movie 5 and never really saw them again. And we have no idea what happened to them. And in the book, it's a very heartfelt, very deep moment for Harry and his aunt. And you kind of have this, everyone disagrees with me, but I have this theory that Dudley is actually like a full circle character. He's the character that goes the most from like asshole to not jerk. Like, he has a he's got this rounded dynamic character that kind of, it surprises you. You don't really see it happening, and then all of a sudden him and Harry are sort of like, I get it, I was a total jerk and I'm really sorry. And he doesn't have to say it, but his actions and his interactions, you totally know that's what happened. And that's just not in this anywhere.
And they shot it, and it's a deleted scene, and it breaks my heart that it's not there, because you're exactly right. I completely and utterly 100% agree with you, because that is a really important thing, because that character, I think wow, I'd never heard anybody say that, but you're right. He goes complete just a-hole to somebody who is telling his cousin, I was wrong. And the way he does it is very Dudley-like. He's, I don't think you're a waste of space. But how Harry takes it is that relationship has been healed finally. Like they've come to an understanding, and I completely agree with you.
It shows how much he's matured, even though he'll never understand Harry, he'll never understand that world, and he'll probably always resent him to some extent. He at least has now come to a point of maturity that says, like, I have been completely misguided this whole time. And I think in the epilogue they talk about that they get together for the holidays now. Like, they have a relationship after this, so to completely get rid of it. And I love hearing his Aunt Petunia kind of finally stand up for herself and be like, no, I wrote him a letter, and you find out the whole reason that they took care of Harry for, 12 years or whatever. You learn that the only way this spell would work is if he stayed with the family, and Petunia wrote to Dumbledore asking to go to Hogwarts. Like, there's so much in the book that didn't make it into the movie that would have made the movie so great.
No, I completely agree with you. And starting off in part 1, you're exactly right. It would have been so wonderful to have that at the beginning, and I don't understand why it's not there, because it was shot.
Yeah,
and it fits just like within that scene.
Maybe it didn't fit, like the thematic or the cinematic approach maybe didn't like fit in with the rest of the film. They couldn't find a good transition for it. I have no idea, but that was really...
And I think that that's one of those things that, we have talked a lot about throughout this series, and I've really tried to approach this as, okay, what if I'm somebody who's never read the books and I'm just watching the films? You've kind of seen that play out, and then you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
Because you may have not read the books. And so this is one of those key places where I think it was important for the film to show that. And again, it's like, I think the deleted scene is like a minute.
Come on, man. Come on.
So yeah. And they already show parts of the scene and then they cut out the rest where Harry's watching them leave. And so they've really just removed the Dudley part. And yeah, I'm right there with you. So what was the other thing that you were just like, what? Why isn't this in the movie?
It went kind of long in the book, and that's probably why it wasn't in the movie, to be honest. But it was probably my favorite part was we spent a lot of time with Harry and Hermione and sometimes with Ron in the forest in this one, a lot of time in the woods. But we missed all that time that they spent at Grimmauld Place, where you learn about Creature and you learn about the Black family and you learn more about Sirius's background and you learn
all about Regulus finally.
Right. And, and that's sort of where you also get a lot of Ron and Hermione's relationship developing. And actually my all-time favorite scene in the book, and it always like makes me all teary-eyed, is one of the nights, I think it's the first night that they're at Grimmauld Place, and Harry can't sleep because he's Harry and classic insomniac. And he wakes up and he looks over and Hermione and Ron are like barely holding hands still where they're like dead asleep. Yeah. I'm like, that just gets me every time. It's like the feels. And they just completely omit like that you get a little bit of them at the house, just enough to move the story along to go to the ministry. And then that's all you get. So I kind of missed that part. That was one of my favorite parts.
No, I'm right there with you with that too. I think the other thing that they cut out of that is the Lupin story, which turns out to be so important, but they just never pay off Lupin after the third movie. They
make him into a werewolf and then he disappears. Yeah. You don't ever get
very frustrating
or anything, yeah.
Because it's such an interesting story, and it doesn't give you that payoff to... Harry has these moments in the series, especially the books, where he has a maturity that's beyond his years. And when he yells at Lupin for abandoning his family,
that's one of those moments.
It's one of those fantastic moments where Harry is absolutely right. But you can also understand why Harry is so angry, because his parents didn't do that, and he sees Lupin making a mistake that he knows that his dad would probably be yelling at Lupin, "What are you doing?" You know, and it's one of those rare moments in the book where I think that Harry mirrors James in a way for a character that you just don't have. We get that in the fifth book and in the fifth movie with Sirius kind of thinking about Harry more in the frame of his friend James. But this one I thought was actually a place where Harry is living out what his dad would have been. Like he's becoming that better man. And I thought that was fantastic. So I agree with you. I missed that. While we're talking about things I missed, I actually missed that we pay absolutely almost no attention to Dumbledore.
I know. It's such a long convoluted like history though. I had a really hard time following it in the book because you've got a lot of G names. I had a really hard time following them all.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, you only scratch the surface of the Dumbledore story, like barely.
And it is disappointing because they touch on it.
Yeah.
But it's not huge, and so I'm very sad to have lost a lot of that because it plays into other parts of the story. And again, they kind of they do a little bit of it, but I will say again, something that's not a good payoff and it's not explained. There's absolutely no mirror ever in the movies.
So he randomly has it, and you're like,
he
where did
randomly
that come
has
from?
this piece of glass that luckily somebody even mentions, "Oh, that's a weird thing to carry in your sock." Thank you, Luna. If you're not a book reader, you have absolutely no idea what that is or why he has it. And it's just
or that he thinks it's Dumbledore for like the longest time. Like you get his look and he looks like Dumbledore, but Harry was like adamant in the book that was Dumbledore and that he wasn't dead or something. Like I don't know, but yes, it was just it was a very vital plot element to continue the story, because that's how you get Dobby, and that's how Dobby dies, and I cry, and then that's how
it plays in with Aberforth.
Yeah, it plays in with that, and then you find, it's so you have to have it. You can't cut that out. But for some reason, him getting it, they cut out, and he just magically has a mirror in his sock, because that's where I keep all my sharp objects.
Right, and it's not even, and it's like in the movies, it's not even the whole mirror. It's just a piece of it, because the mirror got broken. But they never play that out whatsoever. You have no idea how he got it. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where, on a whole, beautifully, and I was talking about this with my +1 tonight, and, she said, Rowling just bits and pieces in each and every book, and it's all important.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And the moment you start cutting things out, you kind of forget how important those things were, because all of the puzzle pieces for her are important. She doesn't do extraneous. She really doesn't. As much as people want to say that certain things could have been cut out, all the themes are building it, and specifically plot points when you start to take those away. And this is one of those where the plot point was never there, and then they use it. It's kind of like how they wanted to cut Creature out of the 5th movie, and Rowling was like, no, you can't do that. He's really important later on.
He has to be there.
The mirror is the same thing. No, that's going to be big.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Hercules, the Disney movie. Indoor plumbing, it's going to be big.
Yeah, I agree. I know she was involved in the process of writing these scripts. I feel like the Deathly Hallows wasn't about the Deathly Hallows. The Deathly Hallows was about the Horcrux. Like, that's 1 and 2, but particularly 1 was literally they took away most of the plot points except for the hunt for the Horcruxes. And I think it felt who was it that described it? That Deathly Hallows to them is the part 1 is the most boring of all of them, because most of the time there's a lot of sitting around, there's a lot of beautiful scenery, but there's a lot of nothing. There's a lot of just nothing happening, which is big in the book. Nothing happens, but did we really need to cut everything else to depict that on screen?
And I think the difference is, too, and something we've talked about, is that Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they go into this book, they know what all the Horcruxes are, except for the one that is, they think it's either something from Gryffindor or something from Ravenclaw, and they're pretty sure it's probably Ravenclaw. But they don't know exactly what it is. So that's the only one that they're not sure. It's frustrating because this, like you're saying, this movie, they're just kind of wandering around, and really the only one they know about is the locket. And so they're just trying to get a hold of that locket, and that's really the main thing. Mm-hmm. And so once you jump to part 2, they're running their butts off trying to find the rest of these, and they still have no idea what they are, and they just kind of bungle their way into them, really.
Yeah. Because the only one besides they know all of them except for the diadem, and they don't know that Harry is a Horcrux.
Exactly.
I think Hermione has an idea the whole time. Like, I think she probably has some awareness that she sort of is living in denial about, because she just doesn't want to admit it, and she doesn't want to be the one to break that to Harry. At least in the book. In the book, that's the impression you kind of get, is that she has some idea. But yeah, I mean, in this one, they're playing like they're naive and they have no idea what any of them are. And I think, if I remember, it's been a while since I read the book, but if I remember, they also knew that most of the Horcruxes were in the castle, were in Hogwarts, and that they were going to have to go back at some point. But they were trying to figure out how they did that, because they knew once they went back, like, all hell would break loose.
Yeah, it's the locket and the cup that they're pretty sure aren't around. They also know, obviously, it's Nagini, the snake, so they're going to have to go fight or be near Voldemort sometime. And then, yes, whether it's a Ravenclaw or a Gryffindor item, they're pretty sure it's probably at the school, but they don't know. But that's their best guess. So yeah, there's a lot of that, and that's the thing I think about this. That yeah, they kind of do a lot of wandering around. The last thing for me that doesn't pay off, and it's disappointing that's not in the film, Wormtail.
Yeah.
And I'm disappointed that that's not in the movie because it's one of those places where Harry's kindnesses have paid off. Because that's a big theme throughout all of Harry Potter, is the way in which Harry has been kind to people and to things that nobody thinks he should have been. And Wormtail is one of those. The kindness that he shows him comes back to help him later. And they don't play it out here. And it's disappointing because then Wormtail just isn't in the second part. And it's just like, you guys should have found a way to put that in that scene so that, because it reminds me of Smeagol and Frodo, and how Smeagol is somebody that everybody else kicks around except for Frodo. You know, Harry does the same thing with Wormtail, and in the end, it turns out to be a blessing to him. In the same way, him being nice to Dobby, which is so awesome, comes to play back in the story, which is just fantastic.
And it totally happens. It's crucial in the second part. It's his kindness is, and I don't want to ruin it for the next one, but his kindness is absolutely vital to his survival in the next one. And he doesn't do it because he thinks it's going to happen. He does it because that's who he is, and he thinks that's the right thing to do. And because he lived in a cupboard for 10 years and, you know, he knows what it's like to be the person that gets kicked around, and he doesn't care who you are. He knows you don't deserve that. So,
right. Okay. So speaking of, we talked about Dudley, but one of the things that I felt like was really interesting was watching at least the film and with Malfoy, because I felt like him and Dudley are interesting mirrors of each other. You know, that because he's actually almost trying to help Harry by not giving him away in the mansion.
Because he could have, and it would have been in his best interest to have identified Harry. Like, it absolutely would have been.
And I love that. I think it's one of those places where, you know, Harry and Malfoy have had their back and forth, but it's almost as if for a little bit, because into the second part, they'll have a showdown again. But it's like, at least at this part, Malfoy himself, Draco, is just, it's like he's not having it, you know? He's not, this isn't what he wants. And I mean, his parents, both of them, don't seem all that happy. I mean, they definitely don't seem to be enjoying the life they said they always wanted. It's almost, it reminds me of Arrested Development, where he's like, "Oh, I've made a huge little mistake, Michael."
Well, it's very interesting. You take characters like the Malfoy family, who have been so horrible throughout this entire series, who we know were horrible the first time around, right? Like, there are, I think it's Goblet of Fire, where you find out that Malfoy was, like, Lucius Malfoy was the Death Eater before, and, like, got the life he has by, you know, stepping on the little wizards and the muggles and stuff like that. And so it's really interesting to see that with this uprising, that they didn't have the same experience this time around. And it was interesting to see, like, the whole, to me, it was the ruling with fear theme. You know, the last time they were just, like, high on power. This time they were genuinely afraid. And the reason that they were living and serving the way they were is because they were terrified. And I'm going to go, like, super historical here for a moment, but it reminds me a little bit of some of the stories you hear from German Nazi soldiers who are like, I just didn't know what else to do. You know, like, it was scarier not to do what I was being told to do than to, you know, stand up. And it's just, it's such this book gets so deep, and we've talked about all the books sort of have their political underlyings and their social themes, but this one sort of is hitting you in the face with them. There's no subtlety to them anymore. And it's one of those moments where you realize how terrifying Voldemort must really truly be. Where all along he's sort of been this like whispered fear that now you're actually seeing what happens.
He who must not be named.
Right, you were afraid of him, but you didn't. We talked about how Umbridge was scarier than Voldemort, but now you're legitimately seeing what it's like, and it's slightly terrifying. Really terrifying.
No, I think that scene that they do perfectly. It's one of the things, the movie has a few perfect scenes. And one of them, I think, is at the beginning of the film when they're at the Malfoys. And
they're sitting around the table?
Yes. And it is the creepiest, the scariest thing because Voldemort is this full-on embodiment of evil that you always kind of expected in your mind when you read about him, but you're finally seeing that portrayed. And yes, now he's become the villain that's worse than Umbridge, because like Umbridge, he's choosing to be evil. He likes to be evil, but he has a raw and utter power that's just even scarier than anything she could ever be. It's just, and it just gives you the creeps.
She's politically terrifying, right? Like,
yes,
you get her because she's behind her pink dress and her smiles and her
cat plates
and her little like noises. Ugh. But he just sits at this table and commands this power in another man's home and is like, I don't want to meet you ever.
Well, I think
horrible.
I like that you say that this book kind of drops the pretenses and it finally, it lays all of its cards on the table, and it does that in a lot of ways. One of them is the way in which the story starts out with this kind of narrative that the Ministry is giving, that everything's fine, we're all fine.
Go back.
How are you?
Go about your business.
Yes, exactly. And it's so interesting because, and it's disappointing that this wasn't in the Order of the Phoenix, because we talked about with the Half-Blood Prince, the Ministry propaganda, and then the Order of the Phoenix, how that kind of, the themes really start there. Half-Blood Prince was so important because Scrimgeour had come to Harry asking him basically to do this very thing that he's doing at the beginning of this movie, which is, everything's fine, it's all good, we're doing the best we can. Yeah, and it's lying to everybody, trying to calm the masses in the worst way. And it's interesting because he's really almost doing the same thing that Fudge was doing when he was telling that, Voldemort wasn't back. It's just on the other side. No, your ministry is strong. We're doing, there's a place where the truth needs to come out, and the ministry trying to portray a face of everything's fine. Just it reeks. And when you look at the world today, wow, it's not all that different, is it?
No, and what's interesting is not only is it everything's fine, to an extent, you believe that they really believe that. Like, you believe the ministry thinks everything's fine and that they're under control and that they don't want anyone to think. It's a very self-motivated message that they're putting out there, right? These elected officials are concerned about looking weak. So instead of being honest with the wizarding world and saying, this is bad, here's what we need to do, they're like, no, we've got it all under control. There's no way I'm ever going to admit to my voters, or however they do their democracy there, that I can't handle this. And you realize at some point it's not in everyone's best interests. And, it's, I'm surprised. The other thing that was kind of missing from that part of it was that the Quibbler played a lot larger role in this book, particularly conveying that message that, like, no, not everything's okay, guys. And, they kind of played that role throughout all of the books, but in this one in particular, it was a very stark contrast to what the Daily Prophet had out and what the Ministry was conveying. And that pretty much got left out of this movie entirely as well. So I think that also would have given you even more of that sense of this false safety.
And that's a really interesting thing that they don't play up, like you said, the Quibbler, because that's the alternative media. You know, I mean, the Quibbler is, when you think about it, it's almost like the talk radio.
Yeah.
You know, the podcasts, the, dare I say it, the Fox News, you know, like the thing that everybody discounts, but is actually telling you the truth.
Well, the Quibbler kind of starts, though, at the beginning of this whole entire series as like a tabloid. It's like,
right, exactly.
It's like that thing that tells you that this celebrity was abducted by aliens and now having a baby. Like, that's what it starts as, and has no grounding and no founding.
Hey, if we learn from Men in Black, we know that that's the best reporting out there. So
Will Smith would be very proud of you. But it evolves. It evolves into being that sort of message of the underground and that like voice of reason. And people are like, maybe it's not so crazy. You know, people started going to it. They started publishing the truth. And it in the second movie, it actually comes back to bite him. But it would have been a great place to introduce that when they were doing it with all of this introduction with the memos and the daily prophets and all that. It would have been a great place to put it.
Well, and I think that the really scary thing too comes in, the ministry narrative continues, but it changes once Voldemort is in control of it.
Yes.
And it feels very familiar in some ways.
Yes.
You know, except that now we really have turned this into Nazi Germany.
Yep.
For the wizarding world.
Yep. You've got the trials and the witch hunts and
If you
or
don't
the anti-witch hunts, I guess, in this case.
The anti-witch hunts. That's the name of the show. I love it. But no, you're exactly right, because, you know, if you don't live up to the artificial standard that Voldemort and his followers have created, you're cast aside. You know, if you don't have the genetic makeup that they desire, they manipulate the language to make people less than human, or they just completely deny the truth and the facts to a preferred narrative, like, oh no, you didn't really get this wand.
Which witch or wizard did you take that from?
Exactly.
I got it myself.
They make things up to make themselves feel better about themselves, or they just, like I said, they're just it. And again, it's beautifully portrayed narrative here, because we are watching these very things happen before our eyes today. Really scary. So, unfortunately, Rowling's like a prophet at this point.
The London prophet of America. But for me, so sometimes that sort of story and that narrative is really hard to watch because it is so real. And I go to the movies and I read books to sort of escape the real. Like, I don't want to go see a movie. Like, I went to the theaters and I saw that movie with Bradley Cooper, like last year, American Sniper. I didn't enjoy it, but not because it wasn't a great movie, but because I don't need to live real life. I live real life, you know? So I tend to shy away from some of those films because the little spare time I have, I want to sort of get lost in something. And so I worried when reading this book and hearing about it being translated to film that it was going to be overwhelmingly sort of political, or you were going to lose hope at some point. You're going to just be like, oh my God, this is just horrible. Like, I just can't watch this anymore. But for some reason, in the last 6 books, the last 6 movies, she was able to really give you hope that Harry has got to win. Like, they have got to pull through this. And even though it looks horrible and dark and dreary, you're looking at these like 3 teenagers who are 17 years old, and you're like, you are going to save this. And you don't know why, but there's that little bit of hope that you have, that you're like, all right, so maybe this will be okay. Like, this sucks, but just hang in there, people. Hang in there. Like, the end is coming, you know? And I think for me, that's how I'm able to get through it and not have it be so overwhelming and so real that I can't watch it.
Jumping into this idea of, I don't know how else to put it other than, you know, like you saying, not losing hope, or it's like almost the feels, you know, like there's something about the feels that she gives you. And I think for me, when I was reading the book, and it plays just a tiny bit in the movie because you see it on the headstone, but when you visited Harry's parents in Godric's Hollow, and on their headstone is this beautiful Bible verse, which you're not expecting in a Harry Potter book. and it says the last enemy to be destroyed is death. I think that's the thing, like, to me, that's the hope. Like, there's something bigger at work in the story, and that what that is, you know, at this point, we don't know exactly what it is, but we somehow know that that's Harry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what's so important, because she weaves this theme in with the story of the three brothers, which is done incredibly in the film. I thought that was one of the smartest,
visual of that.
Yeah, one of the best decisions they made.
Yeah.
The idea that, you know, in the story, the smartest brother who has the invisibility cloak, which Harry has as well, and we see the parallels, meets death at the end of his life as an old friend. And like that there are things that are actually worse than death. And what I love, and this is the thing I think is so genius about Rowling, she's able to tell you what she believes without forcing it down your throat about life and about the afterlife and all of that kind of stuff. But it gives beautiful hope to the story that death is not the end. There is something that is beyond. And being fearful of death is no way to live.
Yes.
And that's Harry, you know, and then the most beautiful thing is what Harry has done his entire life, and he, you know, gets all up on his high horse, and everybody makes fun of him at the beginning of the movie when they have the 7 Potters, that nobody's going to give their life for me. Harry's self-sacrificial nature, you know, that's the hope. That's like the best part of ourselves. And all of those things together, I think, add to the feels for me that keep this from being just dark and dreary, because it's an incredibly beautiful, wonderful story. And the way that she's writing it plays out, it parallels other stories and other things, which I truly believe in my life, that just reinvigorate me. So I love it.
So I love the whole lore of the story and the whole Harry Potter, I guess, legacy. The big piece, and you learn it, you kind of learn it in the movies, but you really sort of get it hit home in the books, in that last scene that was missing from Order of the Phoenix for you. The part that you were really missing, that follow up with Dumbledore, is that not only does Harry have this like sacrificial self part to him, but this whole prophecy, this whole life, this whole mission he has, this whole story you hear through Snape's tears when you learn that he truly cared about Lily, and that all of this was for Harry, was that this was completely like self-created. He being sacrificial is why this happened. Like, him being him is the reason the story played out. Not because it was prophesized, not because Voldemort was hunting him down, but because he continued to be himself that drove forward this kindness, this sacrifice, all of this, building his tribe and finding, you know, it takes a village to do something like this. Just would not have happened if Harry wasn't who he was. It wouldn't have. If it had been Neville, it would have been a totally different outcome. Even though technically could have been Neville. We don't know.
And I think the thing that I always loved about that is there's this wonderful sense of cyclicalness to it. Mm-hmm. Because it's the idea that Harry is prophesied to do something, and yet Harry chooses to continue to do something, so the prophecy comes true, and it's this whole thing that it all plays together. So is it predestined? Yes. Is it a choice? Yes. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, and the way in which Rowling is able to weave that together in this story, to me, is kind of brilliant. The fact that you can show that, like, you know, predestination and...
Well, and it was never actually said to be Harry. It was only Harry because people made the choice that it was Harry. It was a boy born whatever day in June or whatever, September, August. I don't even remember the date now. But a boy born that day, and him and Neville shared the same date. They were born the same day. They were both born to parents in the order. I mean, it honestly could have been either of them. And for whatever reason, they decided it was Harry. And Harry at some point could have said, hey, this isn't me. This isn't my battle. This isn't my fight. Like, I'm done. But he didn't, because that's not who he is.
Right. Voldemort chooses him, which creates the prophecy, meaning it's about Harry. And then Harry continues to choose to believe that prophecy and continue on. And like you said, be himself. And it's all these wonderfully amazing things playing together. And it's just an incredible, I think, part of the story. Yeah. So I'm with you. I really love it. And she, I think you said it beautifully. She finds a way to keep the story from becoming so dark and dreary that you don't want to keep reading. She actually gives you just enough to keep turning the page.
Yeah.
So you figure out how it's going to end. And I think of Tolkien's idea of eucatastrophe, where there's that happy accident where the turn for joy happens. And I think, it comes in for Rowling in the second part of this movie. And so we'll talk about that then.
Well, I think in addition to the happy moments of joy, I know that you mentioned one of the parts that sort of plays into this is this need for three, right? You need Harry, you need Hermione, you need Ron. They need each other, because we don't ever lose hope, because not all three of them lose hope at the same time at any point. Each of them, if Harry starts to lose hope, then Ron comes in and brings it back. If Ron starts to lose hope, Hermione comes back in. It's like this shared experience that they have. And even when Ron leaves, you have that moment where kind of they feel like all is lost, and they turn on the radio and they just start dancing. And it's touching, and it's not romantic, but it's just like, this is what we need in this moment. We need a moment to just dance to this weirdly sorrowful song in the tent and get back on track tomorrow.
Yeah, I that's a great place to move into kind of the way, this movie kind of feels like a road war film. And that scene in particular, it's something that they added for the movie. It's not in the book. What did you end up thinking about that? Because I know there were some mixed opinions about all that.
There was at the end, there was this weird pause when they stopped dancing and they kind of like look at each other, where in any other movie you would just be like, they're going to kiss. But I don't think that was the intention. I don't get that that's what they were trying to do there. I feel like he was really just trying to console her, and that's the only thing he could come up with, because, to be honest, Harry's not very good at feelings. Harry's good at angry. Harry is good at hurt, but Harry is not good at, like, oh no, someone else is feeling feelings. What do I do? Like that, he's not so good at that. And I think that was the only thing he knew how to do, because he couldn't really talk to her about it because he didn't know what to say. And I think that's what they were trying to do, and I don't know if it worked.
I like the scene in the sense that I think one of the interesting things about it is the fact that they're two teenage kids in the woods alone, and life is really sucky at the moment. And they have this moment where any amount of sexual tension that's ever been between them could come to the surface, because
there's no one else there, and no one would ever know. Yeah,
there's no one else there, but it's also, where they've been in life, and where they are in life at this moment, and you make decisions in that kind of place where you wouldn't normally make them. And what I think is there is that moment, like you said, right at the end, where they kind of look at each other. And I kind of read it as that Hermione, she just pulls herself. Once the music stops and the song is over, the magic in that moment is done, and she kind of goes back to being sorrowful. And so does Harry. And it's like there is never going to be anything else, because she loves Ron. He loves Ginny, and they're friends, but they're never going to find that kind of comfort with each other. So I think it was an attempt to say,
If there was anything, it would be.
If there was
here,
ever
there
going to be a
isn't.
time, this would be it. But these two characters, that's not what they're going to be ever.
And I sort of took it as they were trying to recreate that moment in, not Goblet of Fire. Where's the one where he starts dating Lavender?
Half-Blood Prince.
Half-Blood Prince. Where she sees Lavender kiss him. And then she runs off and starts playing with the birds. And Harry's there and like trying to comfort her. I almost felt like it was trying to do that. It was trying to have another moment that was very like two honest friends. Just what are you feeling? But I don't know. It felt a little out of place. It was a beautiful moment. It really was a beautiful moment. And that song is beautiful. But it just felt out of place.
No, I completely get what you're saying. And I think, when I think about it in my mind, there are those people, like, there's probably always that question with that one person in your life, like, what if we had, like, made another choice back in the day, but we didn't? So, and I think that just where those two characters are in that exact moment, too, like, that's what's being said there as well. I think it works enough.
It doesn't like stand out where you're like, that doesn't belong there.
Yeah, no, it feels organic to what's happening in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, that's a smart thing because, this whole section is, and I think doubt and fear have kind of crept into the Trinity.
Yeah.
And part of that,
you're starting to break up these bonds between them.
Right. One of the things of this doubt of which doesn't get played out, we already talked a little bit about in earlier, Harry begins to doubt Dumbledore because he feels like he wasn't given enough. And of course then Ron begins to doubt him as well because of that. And then of course the Horcrux is feeding all of their worst feelings. And I thought that was, that part of the doubt kind of creeping in, it's there in the movie, but I felt like it could have been a lot better, specifically with the Dumbledore stuff, because the real story here at the beginning of the book, this first part, is really the story to understand Dumbledore.
And then the second part is actually really the story to understand Voldemort. It's really all of Tom Riddle's background and where he came from, and you learn Godric's Hollow plays such a big role in the book that because it ties that Dumbledore to Voldemort to Harry connection that we don't have, and it sort of paints this picture of the Trinity actually being Voldemort, Dumbledore, and Harry, and not Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The book gives you a completely different. It's so different from the movie. The movie tells the same basic plot line, but the relationships and the way that it's developed, and you do start to doubt Dumbledore way more in the book than you do in this movie, than you ever do in this movie. Harry has moments of it. But I also wonder if that scene was added. I'm trying to remember when the movie actually came out, how much Harry and Hermione shipping was going on. Like, I wonder if it was kind of added to, like, Rowling was just done talking about it and she's like, I'm just going to be done with it. Here it is. It's not happening. Like, sorry guys, it's not happening. Don't ask me anymore.
The movie had come out long after the book had been released, and at that point we all knew because Ron and Hermione get married and Harry marries Ginny, and so I get what you're saying there, and that makes sense. And I think it's just one of those things I wish had been added to the story of the movie because it plays into the themes they're already doing, but it just helps those themes, And so find a way to add more of that Dumbledore story so you boost what you're already doing and just make it better and make it more believable for the audience that hasn't read the books, And I think that's really frustrating. And I think, too, because the fear part of this doubt and fear, their greatest fears are being played upon by the Horcrux, and Ron really gets the worst of it
But I think they could have done that even more.
Yes,
like,
they could.
He storms off because he thinks that he thinks that Harry and Hermione don't need him, because he thinks they're better together. Just that whole shipping thing, but it doesn't. In the book, it sort of slowly builds. He sees them talking and gets jealous, and she talks to Harry. He starts seeing it. Right. He's reading into things that normally happen, but he's seeing it more. And we don't really get a lot of that before he sort of storms off. He just magically decides that that's it and I'm storming off. But I think if we had built that up a little bit more and then he stormed off and then you had this dancing moment, I feel like that would have built a little bit more organically. And then you would have been like, oh, are they going? Oh, they're not going to. Okay. I think you could have built that just a little bit more, and I don't think it would have been too hard or time consuming, but I think maybe that's what they're trying to do. I don't know, but
it always just feels like the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
And so even here where you have 2 films to do it, it still feels like that. Although I do have to say, I think the best part of the movie and the most well-done scene and the most literal from the book is where Ron faces the nightmare, his worst nightmare of the Horcrux, and it everything that he fears is coming out of that Horcrux, telling them that your mother didn't want you. She would have rather have had Harry. She wanted a girl. Oh, and your best friend, the girl that you love, really likes her better, and then what it shows them of them kissing, and it's just so graphic and creepy, and it is exactly what the book was saying, and they bring that to life so well, so that when he finally kills his demons, he slays his literal demons and destroys the Horcrux at the same time. I think it's a really beautiful scene, and it's played beautifully. And it's the part of, and this is what I say, just like with Tolkien, if you want to do it right, just go back to Tolkien. If you want to do it right, just go back to Rowling. She knew what she was doing, and so when you do what she just did, you're going to be golden. And they do that in that scene, and it's beautiful.
And I love that Harry makes him do it. Like, Harry could have stood up and taken care of it while Ron was being screamed at by this, but he knew it was in Ron's best interest for Ron to do it. And that if he went in there and he killed it, that Ron would just have this psychosis or whatnot. He'll have this feeling of he wasn't good enough until the end of time, because you can't, re-kill the Horcrux. And I think my favorite line is when he comes back. And Hermione's like, oh, how'd you come back? And he's like, there's this little light, and it just right through my heart. And then, he's like, do you think she's going to be mad at me forever? And Harry's like, just keep talking about that little light through your heart and you're golden.
Yes, that was the best.
Me up.
Oh man, I love that whole scene, because it plays out like it does in the book, and he tells the story, and it kind of seems like a cheesy story, but at the same time, it very much fits Ron. And I think that's the great thing about this last book specifically, is that each of the characters kind of goes through a moment where they grow. And that was Ron's. And obviously Harry's comes in the second movie. Mm-hmm. And I think Hermione's comes when she makes that breakthrough with understanding what Dumbledore's been trying to tell her.
Yeah, I don't know that Hermione gets as much of a breakthrough as some of the other characters.
She's Hermione. She doesn't really need as much of one.
Yeah, hers is sort of a slow breakthrough from this sort of know-it-all to being more brave. The application of her knowledge and her being able to do things like, if anything, hers is when she has the idea to jump on the dragon and she's like, I didn't say it was a good idea.
Yeah,
but it's an
true.
idea.
Right.
And, she went with it, even though, book 1 or book 2, Hermione would have been like, this is not a calculated risk we want to take, guys. She's like, jump on the dragon.
Yeah, where she would have been like, now I'm going to bed before either of you find another way to get us killed or worse, expelled.
Yeah, exactly. So I think hers is a smaller story, a longer unravel of her character. Although the other scene that I think came almost exactly straight out of the book was the Dobby death scene. and how that all got handled. Because that's almost the very, very end of this book, of this movie, is when Dobby comes to save Harry Potter, because that's what Dobby does best. And, he dies. Bellatrix gets him with that throwing knife, and, he has the little exchange with Harry Potter, and Harry buries him, and all of that is almost straight out of the book. And it's a beautifully sad scene, and again, that pays off. His kindness to Dobby and wanting to bury him, won over Griphook. And that was important to do. So
Dobby is a free elf. And Dobby has come to save Harry Potter and his friends.
Dobby standing up to Bellatrix is like the best moment. You're like, yes!
Awesome. Actually, my favorite part is that when he's on top of the chandelier and you just hear the...
Dobby didn't mean to kill, so only maim or seriously injure.
Oh, man. Just gorgeous. Dobby is fantastic. And I do have to give a shout out here. We've talked a little bit about all the films and how, well, we talked a lot about all the films, but we have talked a little bit about how the CGI hasn't really lived up. I think this movie, the CGI finally works. Yeah. They finally got it down. I didn't really notice, even rewatching it, where I was like, oh, that's awful.
Yeah. And it could have been with like the scene in the vault. That easily could have been just horrible.
Yeah. So I think that they really picked it up, and that worked really well. I think the end with Dobby is just as emotional as you need it to be. I would have liked to have seen, I think, where Harry's digging the grave, more people helping him, but him wanting to do it by himself and like just out there digging something that was like in the book, it's deep. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more play out in that scene, just because I think it's a cathartic moment for Harry, and it's a cathartic moment for the audience as Harry digs that grave. But it's also important because in the book, it's the time in which Harry's thinking. Yeah. And, of course, we're not getting any of that in the movie, and that is a hugely pivotal scene because Harry, in that whole movement, as he's digging, makes the decisions of what he's going to do next. Like, he puts the whole thing together, and it's disappointing because they can't do that in a movie, and you don't really actually get how analytical and smart Harry can be, even without Hermione. He's able to put all these pieces together, and this is another frustrating thing. Last thing here that I'm frustrated with is the Deathly Hallows. They don't play any part of this movie almost, because
you don't get it until the next movie.
Right. The other half of this story, after they go to Luna's place, is Harry obsessing about the Hallows and the other two telling him, no, we have to find the Horcruxes. Yeah. And it becomes another one of those instances where Harry is obsessing about something that everybody's telling him, no, it's wrong. But actually, Harry's right.
They play together, because that was what Voldemort was so obsessed with, that Harry can actually sort of understand the process of where they're going, because he also shares that obsession for different reasons, but he shares the obsession to really figure it out. Not even realizing, it's not going to ruin anything because they don't talk about it in the movies, but that, he has the cloak from the story, and that the stone, I think he has the stone.
He has the stone and the snitch.
Right. He has the stone and the snitch. So he's got the stone. So he's got everything but the Elder Wand, which is technically rightfully his. So, I mean, he's got them all, but we don't ever really put that all together in the movie. But in the book, they really outline it, because also in the book, you find out that the Peveril brother, the one who had the cloak, was a paternal ancestor of Harry's. That's his dad's great grandfather or something like that. Like, that cloak, when it was passed on to the child, when the father met death as an old friend, that was Harry's family. Like, he has another, like, the cloak from the story. So, which I loved in the book. I thought that was so neat. But
well, and that's the thing too, is that Harry finally puts together in the scene where he's digging the grave all of these desperate pieces, because I mean, we've seen in the movie, he's been getting these flashes of what Voldemort's after, and he's been learning all this stuff, and he finally puts it all together. And it's interesting to me, it's Harry that does that. It's not Hermione.
Right.
Because usually it would be Hermione, but this time it's finally Harry. And I think that's almost vindication for that character, and it's a good thing to finally have happen. We just don't see it play out in the movie, and I guess it's technically the beginning of the second movie, but we don't see that play out where it would be in this movie, because it's where he's digging the grave, and that's not a part of it.
Right. And you don't even get that moment where you see flashes, or you just don't get it. Like that's also, I think, where he comes with the whole plot to break into Gringotts, which that's a whole plot that they've sort of come up with. And you don't get it. You just don't have it, You don't realize it's like a full thought out scheme that they're doing, not just they're winging it. Like, they literally have a plan.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I guess it really comes down to what would we end up rating the Deathly Hallows Part 1? What do you think?
It's important because you get Part 2. But I think I agree that it's it has some real exciting moments and some real key pivotal times, but it is one of the less engaging and harder to rewatch parts, because it's so just, here's what you need to know for the next one. So if I rate it out of 5, I'd probably give it like a 3.5. The CGI is really good and the story parts are really important. But because it was split into 2 movies, you don't really get a big climax like you get when you see a movie start to finish. So 3.5, a little dull.
I'm at the same rating as you are, but I'm coming at it differently. I actually like this one, and I enjoy watching this one. I don't know why. I think it's because the movie itself is so well made. The cinematography in this film is gorgeous, and the way it's shot, it feels so different. And I think that fits. It should. It really should feel different, obviously. So I really like this movie, but I think that for all the things we talked about that it's lacking, it could have been a 5-star movie if it had had all the things that we talked about that are missing.
I think if you'd paced it differently, it could have been
if you
a great
paced it
movie.
differently, and I think if you added what we said you should add, some of those scenes are maybe a minute, some of those scenes are maybe 2 minutes, and some of that stuff is probably like another 10 minutes, especially like the Dumbledore stuff, that probably needs another 10, 15 minutes to explain. But you know what? We're all Harry Potter fans watching this movie at this point, so... And I think then it services the people, again, who didn't read the books. So if you hadn't read the books, the more story that you get, the better. Because, again, there's things in here that, like we talked about with the mirror, where the heck did that come from? What is it? And why is Harry using it? How does he even care about it? Since you've never told us that before, you should probably tell us somewhere here in this movie, somehow. And so, yeah, it's... I actually like it a lot better than I think a lot of people do, but I can see the flaws that it has, and obviously we talked a lot about the things we would have liked to have seen in it. So I don't know. I'm excited to talk about Part 2, and I can't wait to get to Part 2, and then I'm really excited about Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Every time that guy's like, I want to be a wizard in the commercial, I'm like, that's me. I just want to be a wizard.
So I accidentally saw the trailer for it. I don't remember what we were watching, but it came on. I might have been watching Hulu or something and it came on, but I don't watch movie trailers. I said that when they have a mid-year Comic-Con here that happened back in October for us. And on the panel, I was like, I don't watch movie trailers. And I got a bunch of people upset about that. I don't like to know what I'm getting into before I get into it. So I inadvertently saw the trailer and I almost turned it off, but I got so excited I left it on. So, I mean, it has to be a good one if I watch the movie trailer for it.
There you go. There you go. That's awesome. I kind of like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with not watching trailers. If it's a movie that you already know you want to see,
Yeah.
that's great. I'm sure there's other movies out there that you have no idea of, and you saw the trailer and you're like, oh, that's great. But I mean, yeah, if it's a movie you already know what you want to see, I understand not wanting to have it ruined, especially since trailers these days can add a lot from the movie that do completely ruin everything.
Yeah, like the last Avengers one, it basically just told you the whole story in the trailer, and I was like, well, don't have to see the movie now.
Yeah.
I did see the movie, but
I'm so glad that we get to talk about all this stuff. Thank you so much to Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, and Norman Lau, our associate producers through Patreon. I really appreciate these guys. They help make sure that the show does come to everybody each and every week. We are at Trek.fm, a listener-supported network, and so what that means is that you can go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can make sure that all the shows that we do here across the network keep coming to you each and every week. This is a huge network. There's so much going on, and there's just no way that we can pull that off without your support as listeners. And so we really heartfelt thanks to everybody so much who makes it possible. And you can become a part of the team. Every little bit helps. And I mean that with all sincerity. It truly does. Just go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. Now, Drea, I am so excited because I can't believe we started this series at the very beginning of the year, and we're almost finally through it to get to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find It. It always brings me joy when, been eagerly anticipating something, so hopefully it's good. But before we get there, let everybody know where they can find you online, and then, of course, you are part of a wonderful podcast network, so make sure everybody knows about that, too.
So you can find me on Twitter at PCFChick or Instagram, Drea Coffman with COFFMAN. I am a host for Educating Geeks. You can find us at educatinggeeks.com. We are a podcast network that has a handful of different podcasts. We're not nearly as big as Trek FM, but we talk about all kinds of geekdom. We like to focus on bringing new people into our geekdoms instead of making them feel shamed or uncomfortable for not having experienced it. So we like to bring new people in and say, hey, you haven't seen Harry Potter? Well, let me tell you about Harry Potter. So that's sort of what we do. Our podcasts are available on Stitcher or iTunes and on our website, again, educatinggeeks.com.
Cannot wait to get to part 2. It's going to be so exciting. You can find me all over the place as well. You can find me here on the network doing Literary Treks with Dan and Bruce, talking about the books and the comics of Star Trek. You can also find me, of course, on The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Deep Space Nine. You can also find me here, of course, on the 602 Club. But don't forget, if you're just a huge Star Wars fan, you like all the Star Wars episodes we do, check out Star Wars, the 602 Club collection there on iTunes. It's a whole special feed just for those episodes. You can subscribe to that. You can review and rate that as well, so I hope you will do that. And if you love Star Wars, you're going to want to check out Aggressive Negotiations that I do with John Mills over on thenerdparty.com. Or, of course, just type Aggressive Negotiations into iTunes, and that'll help you find that podcast. We have a blast talking about all the things that we love about Star Wars, esoteric weirdness from Star Wars. I mean, recently this last month in October did a lot of things kind of like on the scarier side of Star Wars as we are working towards Halloween, so that's a lot of fun. Just check all that out over there at thenerdparty.com, or of course just search Aggressive Negotiations in iTunes. Thank you so much for joining us, and y'all come back now, you hear?